The emergency klaxon screamed across Whiteman Air Force Base at 0347 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a blade through silk. In the ready room of the 509th Bomb Wing, 12 pilots jolted awake from various states of rest, their bodies automatically responding to the sound that meant one thing: real-world tasking, not another drill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Sarah Mitchell didn't scramble like the others. She remained seated in the corner chair where she'd been quietly reading technical manuals for the past 3 hours, her finger marking her place in a document titled Advanced Penetration: Tactics for Contested Airspace. While the primary pilots rushed to check the mission board, Sarah simply closed her manual and waited. She already knew what the board would say, and she knew her name wouldn't be on it. It never was. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been the backup pilot for the 509th Bomb Wing's B-2 Spirit Squadron for 18 months, a position that existed in the shadow of readiness without the substance of action. At Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, she occupied a unique space in the military hierarchy, essential enough to maintain constant preparedness, invisible enough to be overlooked when decisions were made. The morning sun cast long shadows across the aircraft parking area as Sarah conducted her routine inspection of Spirit of Nebraska, the B-2 bomber that served as the squadron's backup aircraft. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency along the aircraft's distinctive surfaces, checking systems and components that most pilots only examined when assigned to fly. Sarah examined them every day. The B-2 Spirit represented the pinnacle of stealth technology, a flying wing design that could penetrate the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world, while carrying nuclear or conventional weapons with surgical precision. Each aircraft cost more than $2 billion to build and required pilots with exceptional skill and extensive training to operate effectively. Sarah possessed both, yet she remained perpetually in reserve status. Still playing with your imaginary airplane, Mitchell. The voice belonged to Major Kevin Bradley, the squadron's most senior pilot and a man who never missed an opportunity to remind others of his superiority. He approached the aircraft with the casual arrogance of someone who knew he would be selected for any high-profile mission. Sarah continued her inspection without looking up. Just maintaining proficiency, sir. The aircraft requires constant attention to remain mission-ready. Bradley laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Mission-ready for what? You haven't flown a real sortie in 6 months. The Air Force doesn't spend millions training pilots to be permanent ground crew. The comment stung because it contained an element of truth. Sarah's last operational flight had been a routine training mission over the Nevada desert, practicing approaches to simulated targets that posed no threat and carried no consequences. She'd executed the mission flawlessly, as she did everything, but perfection in practice seemed to count for little when real opportunities arose. Someone has to be ready when the primary pilots are unavailable, Sarah replied, her voice maintaining the professional tone she'd perfected over months of similar conversations. The mission doesn't wait for convenient timing. Bradley stepped closer, his voice dropping to a more personal register. Listen, Mitchell, I know you think you're as good as any pilot in this squadron, but there's a difference between being technically proficient and being ready for real combat. The B-2 isn't just another airplane. It's a strategic weapon system that requires judgment, experience, and the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. That's why they choose pilots with combat experience for the important missions. Sarah's hands continued their methodical inspection, but her mind processed Bradley's words with the analytical precision she applied to everything. He was correct that she lacked combat experience, but he was wrong about everything else. She had logged more hours in B-2 simulators than any pilot in the squadron, had studied enemy air defense systems with an intensity that bordered on obsession, and had developed tactical approaches that improved upon standard procedures. Her technical knowledge exceeded that of most senior pilots, but knowledge without opportunity remained theoretical. "I understand your perspective, Major," Sarah said, completing her inspection and stepping back from the aircraft. "I'll continue to maintain readiness in case circumstances change." Bradley shook his head and walked away, leaving Sarah alone with the massive aircraft that had become both her passion and her frustration. She stood in the aircraft's shadow, looking up at the angular surfaces that could bend radar waves like light through a prism, making the bomber nearly invisible to detection systems. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was as invisible to her commanders as the aircraft was to enemy radar. The morning briefing took place in a sterile conference room where pilots gathered to receive updates on training schedules, maintenance issues, and potential mission taskings. Sarah occupied her usual seat in the back row, close enough to hear everything, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention. The squadron commander, Colonel David Harrison, stood at the front of the room, with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, his eyes scanning the assembled pilots, "we've received notification that our readiness status has been elevated to DEFCON 3. Global tensions are increasing, and we need to be prepared for potential tasking at any time. I want every primary pilot to review their emergency procedures and ensure their personal affairs are in order." Sarah noticed that Harrison's gaze passed over her without acknowledgement, as if she were part of the furniture rather than a qualified pilot. The colonel's reference to primary pilots excluded her by definition, despite her identical training and qualifications. She was a backup in every sense, present but not participating, prepared but not chosen. Major Bradley raised his hand. "Colonel, what's the nature of the potential threat? Are we looking at conventional or nuclear tasking?" Harrison's expression remained neutral. "That information is classified above your current clearance level. What I can tell you is that we need to be prepared for extended operations in contested airspace. The missions we might face could be unlike anything we've trained for in peacetime." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. Extended operations in contested airspace represented the most challenging type of mission for a B-2 pilot, requiring not just technical skill, but strategic thinking and the ability to adapt to changing conditions. These were exactly the scenarios she'd been studying in her technical manuals, the situations where her analytical approach might prove valuable. After the briefing, Sarah made her way to the base library, a quiet facility that most pilots avoided. She preferred the library to the officers' club, where conversations typically centered on sports, politics, and complaints about military bureaucracy. The library offered access to technical journals, strategic analyses, and historical accounts of air operations that provided insights unavailable through standard training materials. Sarah's research focused on understanding how air power had been employed in previous conflicts, particularly in situations where conventional approaches had failed. She studied the strategic bombing campaigns of World War II, the precision strikes of the Gulf War, and the counterinsurgency operations of more recent conflicts. Each case study offered lessons about the application of air power under different circumstances. Her current reading material included a classified analysis of Chinese and Russian air defense systems, obtained through her security clearance and studied during her off-duty hours. The analysis revealed sophisticated anti-access strategies designed to deny American forces the ability to operate freely in contested airspace. These defenses represented the type of challenge that B-2 pilots might face in future conflicts. "Interesting reading, Captain." The voice belonged to Chief Master Sergeant Patricia Reynolds, the squadron's senior enlisted advisor and one of the few people who consistently treated Sarah with professional respect. Reynolds had 28 years of experience in the Air Force and had worked with pilots across multiple aircraft types. "Chief Reynolds," Sarah acknowledged, looking up from her reading. I'm trying to understand how our potential adversaries might employ their air defense systems. The technology has evolved significantly since our last major conflict. Reynolds took a seat across from Sarah, her expression serious. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need more of. Too many pilots assume that superior technology automatically translates to mission success. They don't consider how adaptive adversaries might use creativity to overcome technological disadvantages. Sarah nodded. The historical examples suggest that success often depends on unexpected tactics or approaches that circumvent rather than directly confront enemy strengths. The B-2 stealth capabilities are impressive, but they're not invulnerable to every threat. You've given this considerable thought, Reynolds observed. Have you shared your analysis with the squadron leadership? Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her tone carried a hint of frustration. I've prepared several briefings on potential tactical improvements, but there haven't been opportunities to present them. The primary pilots have priority for professional development activities. Reynolds studied Sarah for a moment before speaking. Captain, I've been in this business long enough to recognize exceptional talent when I see it. You have insights that could benefit the entire squadron, but you need to find ways to demonstrate your value beyond maintaining backup status. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the squadron's operations officer. Morrison was a respected pilot who had flown combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan, earning decorations for his service. He noticed Sarah's reading material and paused. Strategic analysis, Captain Mitchell? Morrison asked, his tone indicating genuine interest rather than the dismissive attitude Sarah had come to expect from some officers. Yes, sir. I'm studying how potential adversaries might employ their air defense systems against penetrating aircraft. The tactical implications are significant. Morrison picked up one of Sarah's documents and skimmed through her notes. This is thorough work. Have you considered how these threats might affect our current tactical procedures? I have, sir. I've identified several potential vulnerabilities in our standard approaches and developed alternative tactics that might be more effective in certain scenarios. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Alternative tactics? That's ambitious for a backup pilot. What makes you think you can improve upon procedures developed by pilots with combat experience? Sarah recognized the challenge in Morrison's question, but also heard an opportunity. Sir, I'm not suggesting that my analysis is superior to combat experience. I'm suggesting that academic study, combined with fresh perspectives, might reveal possibilities that haven't been considered. The enemy's capabilities are constantly evolving, and our tactics need to evolve accordingly. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morrison studied Sarah for a long moment. Captain, I want you to prepare a briefing on your tactical analysis. If your ideas have merit, they deserve consideration regardless of your current assignment status. Sarah felt a surge of excitement, but kept her expression professional. Thank you, sir. I'll have the briefing ready within 48 hours. As Morrison left the library, Chief Reynolds smiled at Sarah. That's what I was talking about, Captain. You just earned an opportunity to demonstrate your value. Make sure you're ready for it. Sarah returned to her reading with renewed focus, but her mind was already working on the briefing she would present. For 18 months, she had been the invisible backup pilot, maintaining readiness without recognition. Now she had a chance to prove that her analytical approach and technical expertise could contribute to the squadron's effectiveness. The sun was setting over Whiteman Air Force Base as Sarah made her final inspection of the day, walking around Spirit of Nebraska with the same methodical attention she'd shown that morning. The aircraft sat in its hardened shelter, ready for immediate launch if required. Every system had been checked, every component verified, every procedure reviewed. Sarah stood in the aircraft's shadow, looking up at the angular surfaces that represented the most advanced military technology in the world. She thought about the thousands of hours she'd spent studying, training, and preparing for missions that might never come. The frustration of being perpetually ready but never chosen had driven her to pursue excellence in every area she could control. Tomorrow, she would have the opportunity to present her tactical analysis to the squadron leadership. It might lead to greater recognition, or it might be dismissed as the theoretical work of a pilot without combat experience. Either way, Sarah would be ready. She had learned that being prepared was the only thing she could control in a profession where opportunities were rare and consequences were absolute. The base grew quiet as evening approached, with only the essential personnel remaining on duty. Sarah walked toward her quarters, passing other pilots who were heading to the officers' club for dinner and conversation. She could have joined them, but she preferred to spend her evenings reviewing technical manuals and preparing for scenarios that might never occur. In her quarters, Sarah opened her laptop and began working on the tactical briefing that might change her career. The analysis was comprehensive, covering everything from enemy capabilities to alternative approaches that could improve mission success rates. She worked with the precision of an engineer and the passion of someone who had found their calling in the most challenging profession imaginable. Captain Sarah Mitchell remained the backup pilot for the 509th Bomb Wing, a position that existed in the margins of military aviation. But as she worked through the night, preparing for an opportunity that might never come, she embodied the quiet professionalism that defined the best military officers. She was ready for whatever challenges might arise, even if those challenges seemed unlikely to find her. Sarah's tactical briefing to the squadron leadership took place in the secured conference room known as the tank, a windowless chamber designed to prevent electronic surveillance and protect classified discussions. The room's walls were lined with sound-dampening material, and multiple screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds from around the world. As Sarah connected her laptop to the presentation system, she noticed the skeptical expressions of several senior officers who had attended out of curiosity rather than expectation. Colonel Harrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by Lieutenant Colonel Morrison and Major Bradley. Chief Master Sergeant Reynolds occupied a position near the back, her presence indicating the importance of enlisted perspectives in operational planning. 3 intelligence officers completed the audience, their notebooks ready to capture any insights that might prove valuable. "Captain Mitchell," Colonel Harrison began, "Lieutenant Colonel Morrison tells me you've developed some innovative approaches to penetrating advanced air defense systems. Given the current international situation, we're interested in any tactical advantages we might employ." Sarah activated her first slide, which displayed a comprehensive map of potential threat environments. "Sir, my analysis focuses on 3 primary challenges facing B-2 operations in contested airspace: adaptive radar systems, integrated air defense networks, and the enemy's increasing ability to coordinate responses across multiple domains." The intelligence officers leaned forward, their interest clearly piqued. Sarah's presentation wasn't the typical pilot briefing focused on flight procedures and technical specifications. Instead, she was addressing strategic-level concerns that typically occupied the attention of senior commanders and defense analysts. "The first challenge involves what I call radar evolution," Sarah continued, advancing to a slide showing various antenna configurations. "Our adversaries have developed bistatic and multistatic radar systems that can detect stealth aircraft by analyzing electromagnetic disturbances rather than relying on traditional reflection patterns. These systems are harder to jam and more difficult to avoid through conventional stealth approaches." Major Bradley interrupted with a dismissive tone. "Captain, the B-2 stealth capabilities have been proven in multiple conflicts. You're theoretical. Concerns don't override real-world success." Sarah remained composed, having anticipated this objection. You're correct that the B-2 has been successful in previous conflicts, sir. However, those conflicts involve adversaries with limited technological capabilities. Current threat assessments indicate that near-peer competitors have developed significantly more advanced systems. She clicked to the next slide, which showed intercept patterns from recent intelligence reports. These are actual tracking data from Chinese and Russian air defense exercises. The patterns suggest they're developing tactics specifically designed to counter stealth aircraft. The intelligence officers exchanged glances, recognizing information that aligned with their own classified assessments. Sarah's analysis wasn't just academic theorizing, it was based on current threat intelligence that most operational pilots never saw. The second challenge involves network integration. Sarah continued, displaying a complex diagram showing interconnected defense systems. Modern air defense networks share information in real time, allowing them to coordinate responses across hundreds of miles. A single detection by any sensor can trigger responses from multiple systems simultaneously. Lieutenant. Colonel Morrison leaned forward. Captain, are you suggesting that our current tactics are inadequate for these evolved threats? I'm suggesting that our tactics need to evolve as well, sir. The enemy's ability to coordinate responses means we need to think beyond individual aircraft penetration and consider how to disrupt their decision-making processes. Sarah's next slide showed a tactical scenario that had clearly been developed through extensive analysis. For example, instead of trying to avoid detection entirely, we might deliberately create false signatures to overwhelm their processing capabilities. If we can feed contradictory information into their network, we can create decision paralysis that's more effective than invisibility. The room fell silent as the officers processed this concept. Sarah was proposing a fundamental shift from stealth-based tactics to information warfare approaches that use the enemy's technological sophistication against them. Chief Master Sergeant Reynolds spoke for the first time. Captain, have you developed specific procedures for implementing these concepts? I have, Chief. I've created detailed mission profiles that incorporate these approaches, including timing sequences, coordination requirements, and backup procedures. For various contingencies, Colonel Harrison's expression had shifted from skepticism to genuine interest. Captain Mitchell, I want you to continue developing these concepts. Prepare a comprehensive tactical manual that incorporates your analysis and proposed procedures. We may need these capabilities sooner than anticipated. As the briefing concluded, Sarah felt a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. She had successfully demonstrated her analytical capabilities, but she also recognized that her theories might soon be tested in actual combat situations. The international tensions that had elevated their readiness status were continuing to escalate, and intelligence reports suggested that military action was becoming increasingly likely. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself in an unusual position. While she remained the backup pilot, her role had expanded to include tactical analysis and procedure development. She spent her days working with intelligence officers to refine her understanding of enemy capabilities, and her evenings developing mission scenarios that incorporated her innovative approaches. The intelligence briefing she now attended revealed a troubling picture of global instability. A coalition of hostile nations had formed an alliance designed to challenge American influence in strategic regions. Their military capabilities included advanced air defense systems, cyber warfare capabilities, and sophisticated intelligence networks. Most concerning was their apparent coordination in developing counters to American technological advantages. The situation in the Pacific is particularly volatile, briefed Major Angela Foster, the wing's senior intelligence officer. Our adversaries have established a network of artificial islands equipped with advanced radar systems and surface-to-air missile batteries. They've effectively created an anti-access zone that extends for hundreds of miles. Sarah studied the intelligence maps, noting the positioning of enemy assets and the overlapping coverage areas of their defense systems. Major Foster, what's our assessment of their coordination capabilities? Are these systems networked, or do they operate independently? Intelligence suggests they're fully networked, Captain. They can share targeting information in real time and coordinate responses across the entire theater. It's exactly the type of integrated system you described in your briefing. Sarah felt a chill as she realized that her theoretical analysis was becoming operational reality. The enemy had implemented precisely the type of advanced defense network that made traditional penetration tactics extremely risky. Her alternative approaches weren't just academic exercises. They might be the only viable options for successful mission completion. The daily routine at Whiteman Air Force Base had intensified as the international situation deteriorated. Flight crews were conducting more frequent training exercises. Maintenance personnel were working extended hours to ensure aircraft readiness, and intelligence officers were providing regular updates on developing threats. Sarah found herself increasingly involved in mission planning discussions, her analytical insights proving valuable for operational preparation. During one particularly intense planning session, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison presented a hypothetical scenario that sounded suspiciously like actual intelligence. Suppose we needed to conduct a precision strike against a high-value target located within a heavily defended area. The target is protected by multiple layers of air defense, including early warning radars, surface-to-air missiles, and fighter aircraft. How would we approach this mission? Sarah had been expecting this question and had spent considerable time developing a response. Sir, traditional approaches would require either overwhelming force to suppress the defenses or multiple aircraft to create diversionary attacks. Both approaches have significant risks and resource requirements. She moved to the briefing screen and began sketching a tactical diagram. Instead, I propose using what I call cognitive deception. We feed false information into their defense network to create confusion about our actual intentions and capabilities. The other officers watched as Sarah outlined a complex operation that involved multiple phases of deception, misdirection, and precisely timed attacks. Her plan required detailed coordination between aircraft, electronic warfare systems, and intelligence operations. The key is understanding that their advanced technology becomes a vulnerability when it's fed incorrect information. Sarah explained. Their automated systems will respond to false signals as if they were real threats, creating opportunities for actual penetration. Major Bradley, who had been increasingly respectful of Sarah's capabilities, raised a practical concern. Captain, this approach requires incredible precision in timing and execution. A single mistake could expose our aircraft to the entire defense network. Sarah nodded. You're absolutely right, sir. The margin for error is minimal, which is why extensive simulation and training would be essential. But the alternative, direct confrontation with their integrated defenses, has even higher risks. The discussion continued for hours as the officers explored various aspects of Sarah's proposed tactics. By the end of the session, it was clear that her analytical approach had identified genuine tactical innovations that could prove decisive in actual combat. As Sarah left the planning session, she encountered Chief Master Sergeant Reynolds in the corridor. The senior enlisted advisor had been observing the discussions with obvious interest. Captain Mitchell, Reynolds said, I've been in the Air Force for nearly 3 decades, and I've never seen a young officer develop such sophisticated tactical concepts. Your analysis is impressive, but I'm curious about something. Sarah paused, respecting Reynolds' experience and judgment. What's that, Chief? How confident are you that these tactics would work in actual combat? Theory is one thing, but execution under pressure is entirely different. Sarah considered the question carefully. Chief, I'm confident in the analysis, but you're right that combat introduces variables that can't be fully anticipated. The advantage of these approaches is that they're designed to be adaptive. If one element doesn't work as planned, the overall strategy can adjust. Reynolds nodded slowly. That's a mature answer, Captain. I hope we don't have to find out how accurate your assessment is, but if we do, I'm glad you've been thinking about these problems. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Harrison, who appeared unusually tense. Captain Mitchell, I need to speak with you privately. Chief Reynolds, thank you for your time. As Reynolds departed, Harrison led Sarah to his office and closed the door. The colonel's expression was serious, indicating that whatever he was about to discuss was significant. Captain, the tactical concepts you've developed may be needed sooner than anyone anticipated. I can't provide details, but I want you to know that your analysis has been forwarded to higher headquarters. There are people at the Pentagon who are very interested in your work. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. Thank you, sir. I'm prepared to support whatever missions may be required. Harrison studied her for a moment. Captain, I need to ask you a direct question. If you were called upon to execute these tactics in actual combat, would you be ready? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah understood that this wasn't a hypothetical inquiry. It was an assessment of her readiness for real-world operations. Sir, I've been preparing for this possibility since I became a pilot. I understand the risks and responsibilities involved. If selected for a mission, I will execute to the best of my abilities. Harrison nodded. That's what I needed to hear. Continue your analysis work, but also ensure you're maintaining flight proficiency. The situation is evolving rapidly, and we need every qualified pilot ready for potential tasking. As Sarah left Harrison's office, she realized that her status as the backup pilot might be changing. The international crisis was creating demands for tactical innovation and operational flexibility that matched her analytical capabilities. For the first time since arriving at Whiteman, she felt that her unique skills might be valued at their true worth. The next few days brought a series of classified briefings that painted an increasingly grim picture of global tensions. Intelligence reports indicated that hostile forces were positioning for what appeared to be a major military operation. American forces worldwide were being placed on heightened alert, and strategic assets were being repositioned to respond to various contingencies. Sarah found herself attending briefings that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. Her tactical analysis had earned her access to intelligence assessments typically reserved for senior commanders. The information she received confirmed her worst fears about enemy capabilities while validating her innovative approaches to countering those capabilities. The enemy's integrated air defense network was even more sophisticated than her initial analysis had suggested. They had developed not just technological countermeasures to American stealth aircraft, but tactical procedures that maximized their defensive advantages. Most troubling was their apparent understanding of American operational procedures, suggesting that they had been studying and preparing for this confrontation for years. As Sarah reviewed the latest intelligence reports in her quarters, she realized that the theoretical scenarios she had been analyzing were becoming operational realities. The enemy's capabilities, the tactical challenges, and the strategic implications all aligned with her academic assessments. Her months of preparation as the invisible backup pilot had inadvertently prepared her for a crisis that was about to test every assumption about modern warfare. The base grew quiet as evening approached, but Sarah continued working on her tactical analysis. She had a growing sense that the time for theoretical preparation was ending and the time for practical application was beginning. Her unique position as the backup pilot, who had studied enemy capabilities more thoroughly than anyone else in the squadron, was about to become critically important. In the distance, she could hear the sound of aircraft engines as maintenance crews conducted routine inspections and systems checks. The B-2 bombers sat in their hardened shelters, ready for immediate launch if required. Sarah thought about Spirit of Nebraska, the aircraft she had been maintaining and studying for 18 months. Tomorrow, she might finally have the opportunity to prove that her analytical approach and technical expertise could contribute to mission success in ways that went far beyond. Backup status. The emergency notification arrived at 0215 hours on a Tuesday morning, transmitted through encrypted channels that bypassed normal communication protocols. Sarah was awakened by the harsh buzzing of her secure phone, a device that had remained silent for the entire 18 months of her assignment. The caller identification showed only a series of numbers that indicated the message originated from the Pentagon's National Military Command Center. Captain Mitchell, this is Colonel Rebecca Torres, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations. You are directed to report immediately to the Secure Communication Facility at Whiteman Air Force Base for priority. Briefing. This is not a drill. Sarah's training kicked in automatically as she acknowledged the order and began preparing for what she instinctively knew would be a career-defining moment. The Secure Communication Facility was located in the base's most protected area, a hardened bunker designed to maintain contact with national leadership during the most severe crises. In 18 months at Whiteman, she had never been inside. The facility's interior resembled a smaller version of the Pentagon's war room, with multiple screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds from around the world. Sarah was escorted to a briefing room where she found Colonel Harrison waiting alongside 3 officers she didn't recognize. Their uniforms bore the insignia of Strategic Command, suggesting that whatever was happening had escalated beyond wing level. Operations. Captain Mitchell, Harrison began, his expression grave. I'm going to share information that is classified at the highest levels. What you learn in this room cannot be discussed with anyone outside of designated personnel. Sarah nodded her understanding as one of the STRATCOM officers activated a large display screen. The image showed satellite photography of what appeared to be a massive military installation surrounded by defensive positions. 12 hours ago, the officer continued, hostile forces initiated what they're calling Operation Steel Curtain. They've simultaneously attacked American installations in 3 different regions, using coordinated strikes designed to cripple our ability to respond to their primary objective. The screen changed to show a map of the South China Sea, with multiple red symbols indicating enemy positions. Their main force has established a siege around Guam, cutting off our most important Pacific base from resupply and reinforcement. They've created a defensive perimeter using the integrated air defense network that your tactical analysis predicted. Sarah felt a chill as she realized that her theoretical scenarios had become operational reality. The enemy had implemented precisely the type of sophisticated defense network that made conventional military responses extremely dangerous. The siege is more than just a military operation, another STRATCOM officer explained. They've also deployed electronic warfare systems that are jamming our communications and disrupting our satellite networks. Our forces on Guam are effectively isolated, and their situation is deteriorating rapidly. The implications were staggering. Guam served as the cornerstone of American military presence in the Pacific, hosting strategic bombers, nuclear submarines, and advanced fighter aircraft. If the base fell, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the region and potentially trigger a global conflict. Sir, Sarah said carefully, what's the current assessment of their defensive capabilities? Are we looking at the same integrated network I described in my analysis? Worse, Harrison replied. They've improved upon the systems you studied. Our intelligence indicates they've developed new technology specifically designed to counter our stealth aircraft. Every conventional approach we've considered has been rejected as too risky. The senior STRATCOM officer leaned forward. Captain Mitchell, your tactical analysis has been reviewed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They believe your innovative approaches may be our only viable option for penetrating the enemy's defenses and breaking the siege. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. The theoretical concepts she had developed as an academic exercise were being considered for actual implementation in what might be the most important military operation since World War II. Sir, I need to understand the specific mission parameters. What exactly are we trying to accomplish? The officer activated another display showing detailed target information. The enemy's siege depends on 3 critical nodes: a command and control facility, an advanced radar installation, and a missile coordination center. If we can destroy all 3 simultaneously, their defensive network will collapse and we can break the siege. Sarah studied the target layout, noting the defensive positions and the coordination requirements. The timing would be absolutely critical. The enemy's network is designed to adapt to attacks, so we'd need to prevent them from adjusting their defenses. Exactly. Which is why we need your cognitive deception tactics. We need to overwhelm their decision-making process while delivering precision strikes against all 3 targets. The briefing continued for another hour, revealing the full scope of the crisis and the limited options available to American forces. Every conventional approach had been analyzed and rejected. The enemy's defenses were too sophisticated, their coordination too effective, and their positioning too advantageous for traditional military operations. Captain, the senior officer concluded, we're asking you to do something unprecedented. We want you to take your theoretical concepts and turn them into an operational mission that could determine the outcome of this conflict. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had spent months developing tactical innovations as intellectual exercises, never imagining they might be needed for a real-world crisis of this magnitude. I understand, sir. How much time do I have to develop the mission plan? 72 hours. The siege situation is deteriorating rapidly, and we estimate that's the maximum time our forces can hold out. As the briefing concluded, Sarah found herself in an unprecedented situation. She was no longer the backup pilot studying theoretical scenarios. She was the primary architect of a mission that could determine the fate of American forces in the Pacific. The next 3 days became a blur of intensive planning, coordination, and preparation. Sarah worked with intelligence officers to refine her understanding of enemy capabilities, collaborated with electronic warfare specialists to develop the deception components of her plan, and coordinated with multiple squadrons to ensure the mission's complex timing requirements could be met. Her innovative approach required unprecedented coordination between different types of aircraft and systems. The mission would begin with electronic warfare aircraft, creating false signatures to confuse the enemy's sensors. Simultaneously, cyber warfare specialists would inject misleading information into the enemy's command networks. As the enemy's defensive systems responded to these false threats, Sarah would penetrate their perimeter using routes that her analysis had identified. As optimal, the complexity was staggering. Every element of the mission had to be precisely timed and coordinated. A single mistake could expose American aircraft to the full power of the enemy's defensive network, resulting in catastrophic losses and mission failure. Captain Mitchell, said Major General Patricia Williams, the STRATCOM officer overseeing the operation, I need to be completely honest with you. This mission is unlike anything we've attempted before. Your tactical concepts are sound, but we're asking you to execute them under conditions that leave no room for error. Sarah had been expecting this conversation. General, I understand the risks. I also understand that conventional approaches have been rejected because they're even more dangerous. My analysis suggests this is our best option. That's what concerns me, Williams replied. We're betting everything on an untested approach developed by a pilot who has never flown in combat. Are you confident that your theories will work in actual operations? The question struck at Sarah's deepest uncertainties. She had spent months developing these concepts through academic study and simulation, but combat introduced variables that couldn't be fully anticipated or controlled. General, I'm confident in the analysis, but I understand that real-world conditions may require adaptation. The advantage of this approach is that it's designed to be flexible. If one element doesn't work as planned, the overall strategy can adjust. Williams studied Sarah for a long moment. Captain, I'm going to authorize this mission, but I want you to understand the implications. If you succeed, you'll have accomplished something unprecedented in military aviation. If you fail, the consequences could be catastrophic for American forces worldwide. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but Sarah also felt a sense of purpose that had been missing throughout her career. For the first time, her analytical capabilities and technical expertise were being employed at their full potential. The mission preparation intensified as the 72-hour deadline approached. Sarah found herself working with some of the most skilled personnel in the American military, all focused on turning her theoretical concepts into operational reality. The electronic warfare specialists who would create the false signatures were amazed by the sophistication of her deception plan. The intelligence officers who would inject misleading information into enemy networks were impressed by her understanding of their decision-making processes. Captain, said Colonel Marcus Thompson, the electronic warfare specialist leading the deception component, your analysis of the enemy's automated response systems is incredibly detailed. How did you develop such specific knowledge of their capabilities? Sarah smiled grimly. I spent months studying their training exercises and doctrine publications. Their technological sophistication is also their weakness. They've become dependent on automated systems that can be manipulated if you understand their logic. The preparation revealed aspects of the mission that hadn't been apparent during the initial planning. The enemy's defensive network was even more sophisticated than originally assessed, with multiple layers of redundancy and adaptive capabilities that made conventional penetration nearly impossible. They've learned from our previous operations, explained Major Jennifer Davis, the intelligence officer providing threat assessment. Every technique we've used successfully in the past has been studied and countered. They're specifically prepared for traditional American tactics. Sarah nodded. That's why the cognitive deception approach is essential. They're prepared for our conventional tactics, but they haven't anticipated strategies that turn their own technology against them. The mission briefing for the full operational team took place in the same secure facility where Sarah had received her initial orders. The assembled personnel included pilots from multiple squadrons, electronic warfare specialists, intelligence officers, and communication technicians. Sarah stood at the front of the room, preparing to brief a mission that would either validate her innovative approach or expose its fatal flaws. The mission objective is to simultaneously destroy 3 critical nodes in the enemy's defensive network. Sarah began, activating the display screen. The success of this operation depends on precise timing, flawless coordination, and the effective implementation of cognitive deception tactics. She outlined the mission's multiple phases, explaining how different elements would work together to create confusion in the enemy's decision-making process, while delivering devastating strikes against their key facilities. The enemy's strength lies in their integrated network, Sarah continued. They can coordinate responses across hundreds of miles and adapt their defenses in real time. Our approach exploits this strength by feeding their network false information that forces them to make incorrect decisions. The assembled officers listened intently as Sarah described the most complex military operation any of them had ever encountered. The mission required split-second timing, perfect coordination, and the successful execution of tactical concepts that had never been tested in combat. Questions? Sarah asked as she concluded her briefing. Major Bradley, who had been skeptical of Sarah's capabilities for months, raised his hand. Captain, This mission depends on everything working perfectly. What happens if one element fails? Sarah had anticipated this question and had developed detailed contingency plans for multiple failure scenarios. Sir, the mission is designed with multiple redundancies. If any single element fails, we can adapt the overall strategy to compensate. The cognitive deception approach is inherently flexible. The questions continued for another hour, with Sarah demonstrating mastery of every aspect of the complex operation. By the end of the briefing, even the most skeptical officers had to acknowledge that her analysis was comprehensive and her planning was thorough. As the briefing concluded, Sarah realized that the next phase of her career was about to begin. She would no longer be the backup pilot who studied theoretical scenarios. Tomorrow she will be the primary pilot executing the most important mission of her career. With the fate of American forces in the Pacific hanging in the balance, the enemy's sophisticated defenses had created a crisis that conventional tactics couldn't resolve. Sarah's innovative approach represented the only viable solution, but it remained untested in the crucible of actual combat. The siege around Guam was tightening, and time was running out for the isolated American forces. In less than 24 hours, Sarah would discover whether her months of analytical preparation had created a breakthrough in military tactics or simply an elaborate theory that would collapse under the pressure of real-world operations. The escalating threat had finally found its match in the backup pilot, who had been invisible for so long that no one had noticed her potential until the crisis demanded her unique capabilities. The final mission briefing took place at 04:00 hours, 18 hours before the scheduled launch time. Sarah entered the secure briefing room to find it filled with tension so thick it seemed to press against her skin. The assembled personnel included not just the operational team, but senior commanders whose presence indicated the mission's unprecedented importance. General Patricia Williams sat at the head of the table, her expression revealing the weight of a decision that could determine the fate of American forces across the Pacific. "Ladies and gentlemen," Williams began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions throughout her career, "we have received UPDA-TED intelligence that fundamentally alters our operational parameters." The main display screen activated, showing satellite imagery that made Sarah's stomach drop. The enemy's defensive positions around Guam had been reinforced overnight, with additional surface-to-air missile batteries and what appeared to be mobile radar units that could adapt their positions in real time. "The enemy has accelerated their timeline," continued Major General Robert Stone, the Joint Chiefs representative who had flown in from Washington. "They're no longer content to maintain the siege. Intelligence indicates they're preparing for a final assault that will occur within the next 36 hours. Sarah felt the mission's complexity multiplying exponentially. The enemy wasn't just defending their positions. They were preparing to eliminate American forces entirely. The carefully planned 72-hour preparation timeline had been compressed to less than 24 hours, with additional defensive complications that hadn't been accounted for in the original analysis. "Furthermore," Stone continued, "our cyber warfare specialists have discovered that the enemy's command network includes quantum encrypted communication links that are immune to our electronic warfare capabilities. The cognitive deception components of Captain Mitchell's plan may be significantly less effective than originally calculated." The room fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled officers. Sarah's innovative approach had been based on the ability to inject false information into the enemy's decision-making process, but quantum encryption created an impenetrable barrier that conventional cyber warfare couldn't breach. Colonel Harrison looked directly at Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, given these developments, do you still believe your mission plan is viable?" Sarah's mind raced through the tactical implications of the new intelligence. The enemy's quantum encrypted communications meant that her cognitive deception tactics would be limited to the automated sensor systems rather than the command network itself. The additional defensive positions created overlapping coverage, areas that eliminated several of the penetration routes she had identified as optimal. Sir, the fundamental concepts remain sound, but the execution will be significantly more challenging. Quantum encryption limits our ability to create command-level confusion, but we can still overwhelm their automated defensive systems with false signatures. That's not enough, Major Bradley interjected, his voice carrying the frustration of someone who had always questioned the mission's feasibility. Without the ability to deceive their command network, we're essentially conducting a conventional penetration against the most sophisticated air defense system ever deployed. The risks are astronomical. Sarah understood Bradley's concerns because she shared them. The mission had always been dangerous, but the new intelligence transformed it from extremely risky to nearly suicidal. However, the alternative, allowing American forces to be eliminated while hostile nations established permanent control over strategic regions, was unacceptable. Major Bradley is correct about the increased risks, Sarah acknowledged, but we need to consider the consequences of inaction. If we don't break the siege within the next 36 hours, we'll lose our Pacific capabilities entirely. General Williams leaned forward, her expression grave. Captain Mitchell, I need you to provide a completely honest assessment. Given the current intelligence, what are the realistic chances of mission success? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah had spent months developing confidence in her analytical approach, but the compressed timeline and enhanced enemy capabilities had created variables that couldn't be fully calculated. Generally, under the original parameters, I estimated a 70% probability of success. With the current intelligence, that drops to approximately 30%. However, the consequences of failure for this mission are no worse than the certain consequences of taking no action at all. The stark mathematics of the situation created a suffocating atmosphere in the briefing room. Every officer present understood that they were contemplating an operation with a 70% chance of failure, but also understood that the alternative was accepting strategic defeat. There's another factor we haven't discussed, said Colonel Torres, the intelligence specialist who had been monitoring enemy communications. Our signals intelligence indicates that the enemy knows we're planning something. They don't have specifics, but they're aware that American forces are preparing some kind of response. Sarah felt the final pieces of complexity falling into place. The enemy's awareness of American preparations meant they would be at maximum readiness with their defensive systems operating at peak efficiency. The element of surprise, which had been central to her tactical approach, was significantly compromised. How much do they know? Sarah asked. Enough to have repositioned their mobile assets and increased their alert status. They're expecting us to attempt something, but they don't know what or when. The situation had evolved beyond even Sarah's most pessimistic projections. The enemy's defenses were stronger than originally assessed. Their timeline had accelerated, and their awareness of American preparations had eliminated key tactical advantages. The mission was becoming a desperate gamble with the fate of American strategic capabilities hanging in the balance. Sir, Sarah said to General Williams, I request permission to modify the mission parameters. Given the changed circumstances, I believe we need to abandon the cognitive deception approach and focus on what I call controlled chaos. Williams raised an eyebrow. Explain. Sarah moved to the display screen and began sketching a new tactical approach. Instead of trying to deceive their systems, we create so much legitimate activity that their network becomes overloaded with real information. We use multiple aircraft to create simultaneous threats from different directions, forcing them to divide their attention and resources. The concept was radically different from her original plan. Instead of subtle deception, she was proposing to overwhelm the enemy's sophisticated systems with sheer complexity, creating opportunities through information overload rather than misinformation. The advantage of this approach is that it doesn't depend on our ability to penetrate their quantum encryption. Sarah continued. We create real threats that their systems must respond to, but the sheer volume of simultaneous activity exceeds their processing capabilities. Major General Stone studied the proposed modifications. Captain, this approach would require significantly more aircraft and personnel. We'd be putting many more people at risk. Yes, sir, but we'd also be creating much better odds of success. The enemy's defenses are designed to handle precision threats, not chaos. If we can create enough simultaneous activity, their network will reach a saturation point where it begins making errors. The discussion continued for another hour as Sarah outlined the details of her modified approach. The new plan required coordination between multiple squadrons, precise timing across different types of aircraft, and flawless execution of the most complex air operation in military history. The critical element is timing, Sarah explained. Every aircraft must reach its assigned position within a 30-second window. If we're not synchronized, the enemy will be able to deal with each threat individually. Colonel Harrison looked concerned. Captain, coordinating that many aircraft with such precision normally requires months of training. We have less than 18 hours. That's why I propose using the backup pilots, Sarah replied. We've been maintaining readiness for exactly this type of situation. Every backup pilot in the Air Force has been training for missions they thought would never come. This is what we've been preparing for. The suggestion created another moment of silence in the briefing room. Sarah was proposing to execute the most important mission in decades using pilots who had been considered secondary personnel, relegated to backup status because they lacked the combat experience of primary pilots. Captain, General Williams said slowly, are you suggesting that backup pilots are better suited for this mission than our most experienced combat veterans? Sarah chose her words carefully. I'm suggesting that this mission requires pilots who have been studying enemy capabilities and developing innovative tactics rather than pilots who have been successful using conventional approaches. The backup pilots have been analyzing these exact scenarios because we've had the time to focus on theoretical preparation. The logic was sound but challenging to accept. The military's natural inclination was to assign the most experienced pilots to the most important missions, but Sarah was arguing that experience with conventional tactics might actually be a disadvantage when facing unprecedented threats. Furthermore, Sarah continued, the backup pilots have been working together on these tactical concepts for months. We understand each other's approaches and can coordinate more effectively than pilots who haven't been collaborating on these specific scenarios. Major Bradley looked skeptical. Captain, combat experience provides judgment and decision-making, capabilities that can't be replaced by theoretical preparation. How do we know that backup pilots will perform effectively under actual combat conditions? We don't, Sarah admitted. But we also know that conventional approaches have been rejected as too dangerous. The enemy's defenses are specifically designed to counter experienced pilots using traditional tactics. This situation requires innovative thinking rather than proven techniques. The debate continued as senior officers wrestled with a decision that contradicted decades of military doctrine. They were being asked to trust the most important mission in years to pilots who had been considered insufficiently experienced for normal operations. There's one more factor to consider, Sarah added. The enemy's intelligence about our preparations is probably focused on our primary squadrons and most experienced pilots. They may not be aware of the backup pilots' capabilities or tactical innovations. General Williams stood and walked to the display screen, studying the tactical diagrams Sarah had created. Captain Mitchell, if I authorize this mission using your modified approach and backup pilot personnel, what are your revised odds of success? Sarah had been calculating probabilities throughout the discussion. weighing the advantages of the controlled chaos approach against the risks of using less experienced pilots. Generally, I estimate a 65% probability of success. The controlled chaos approach is more effective against their defenses, and the backup pilot's tactical innovations provide advantages that outweigh their lack of combat experience. The mathematics were significantly better than the 30% estimate for the original plan, but still represented a substantial risk. Williams was being asked to approve an operation that had a 35% chance of catastrophic failure. "Colonel Harrison," Williams said, "what's your assessment of Captain Mitchell's recommendations?" Harrison had been observing the discussion with obvious internal conflict. "General, Captain Mitchell has consistently demonstrated exceptional analytical capabilities and tactical innovation. Her assessment of enemy capabilities has been proven accurate, and her proposed solutions are creative and well-reasoned. However, the risks remain substantial. And your recommendation?" "I recommend approving the mission, General. The consequences of inaction are certain defeat. The consequences of action are uncertain, but they offer the only possibility of success." Williams nodded slowly. "Captain Mitchell, you have authorization to proceed with your modified mission plan using backup pilot personnel. Launch time is 18 hours from now. I want hourly progress reports on mission preparation." As the briefing concluded, Sarah realized that she had successfully advocated for the most unconventional military operation in modern history. The backup pilots who had been considered secondary personnel were about to become the primary force for breaking the siege that threatened American strategic capabilities. The next 18 hours would determine whether her faith in analytical preparation and innovative tactics was justified, or whether the military's traditional reliance on experience and proven methods should have been maintained. The breaking point had arrived, and Sarah had convinced senior leadership to trust everything to an approach that existed only in theory and the capabilities of pilots who had never been tested in combat, the enemy's accelerated timeline, and enhanced defenses had created a crisis that conventional military doctrine couldn't resolve. Sarah's modified approach represented the only viable alternative, but it remained unproven and dependent on the performance of personnel who had been overlooked throughout their careers. In less than 18 hours, the backup pilots would either validate their months of theoretical preparation or demonstrate that combat experience was irreplaceable. The fate of American forces in the Pacific hung in the balance, and the decision had been made to trust everything to the pilots, who had been invisible for so long that no one had noticed their potential until the crisis demanded their unique capabilities. The transformation began at 0600 hours, exactly 12 hours before the scheduled launch time. Sarah walked into the hangar housing Spirit of Nebraska to find it surrounded by activity unlike anything she had witnessed in 18 months of backup status. Ground crews were conducting final systems checks, ordnance specialists were loading precision-guided munitions, and maintenance personnel were performing inspections with the intensity reserved for combat operations for the first time since arriving at Whiteman Air Force Base. Sarah approached her aircraft not as the backup pilot maintaining readiness for a mission that might never come, but as the primary pilot preparing for the most important operation of her career. The transition from invisible preparation to visible responsibility was overwhelming, but also deeply satisfying. "Captain Mitchell," called Master Sergeant Diana Parker, the crew chief who had overseen Spirit of Nebraska's maintenance throughout Sarah's assignment. "Your aircraft is ready for combat operations. All systems are functioning within optimal parameters, and the specialized equipment you requested has been installed and tested." Sarah looked at the aircraft with new eyes, seeing not just the technological marvel she had been studying for months, but the weapon system that would determine whether her theoretical innovations could succeed in actual combat. The B-2's angular surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an almost supernatural appearance that justified its reputation as a ghost in the sky. Thank you, Sergeant Parker. I know you've been working around the clock to prepare for this mission. Parker's expression was serious but supportive. Captain, I've been maintaining this aircraft for 5 years, and I've never seen anyone study its capabilities as thoroughly as you have. If anyone can make this mission work, it's you. The endorsement meant more to Sarah than recognition from senior officers because it came from someone who understood the aircraft's technical requirements. Parker had observed Sarah's methodical approach to aircraft systems and had developed respect for her analytical precision. Sarah climbed into the cockpit of Spirit of Nebraska, settling into the ejection seat that had been adjusted to her precise specifications. The instrument panel displayed the familiar array of flight controls, navigation systems, and weapon management interfaces that she had memorized through countless hours of simulation training. But today, every switch and display carried the weight of operational significance. The pre-flight checklist took on new meaning as Sarah verified each system's readiness. The radar warning receivers that would detect enemy threats, the electronic countermeasures that would protect against surface-to-air missiles, the communication systems that would coordinate with other aircraft, every component had been studied theoretically and would now be tested in the crucible of combat. Spirit of Nebraska, this is tower control. You are cleared for engine start and systems check. Sarah's hands moved automatically through the engine start sequence, her muscle memory executing procedures that had become second nature, the B-2s. 4 engines spooled up with a sound that was barely audible outside the aircraft, a testament to the stealth technology that made the bomber nearly invisible to acoustic detection systems. As the aircraft systems came online, Sarah's heads-up display was populated with information that transformed the cockpit into a comprehensive tactical environment. Navigation waypoints marked the route to the target area. Threat symbols indicated known enemy positions, and communication channels connected her to the command network that would coordinate the mission. All backup pilots, this is Control. Report to Briefing Room 7 for final mission coordination. Sarah shut down the aircraft systems and made her way to the briefing room, where she found 11 other pilots who had spent their careers preparing for missions they thought would never come. The assembled personnel represented every backup pilot in the strategic bomber force, drawn from bases across the country and brought together for an operation that would test every aspect of their theoretical preparation. Captain Michael Turner, from Barksdale Air Force Base, was known for his expertise in electronic warfare tactics. Captain Lisa Chun from Ellsworth had developed innovations in low-level penetration techniques. Captain Robert Davis from Dias had created new approaches to precision targeting in contested environments. Each pilot brought specialized knowledge that complemented Sarah's overall tactical framework. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, addressing her colleagues for the first time as mission commander rather than fellow backup pilot, "we are about to execute the most complex air operation in military history. The success of this mission depends on flawless coordination between aircraft operating in different roles, but working toward a common objective." She activated the briefing room's display system, showing the tactical overview that had been refined throughout the day. "The enemy's defensive network is designed to handle conventional threats, but our approach will create controlled chaos that exceeds their processing capabilities." The mission plan revealed the full scope of Sarah's innovative thinking. 12 B-2 bombers would approach the target area from different directions, each carrying specialized ordnance designed for specific targets. Electronic warfare aircraft would create false signatures to confuse enemy sensors, while cyber warfare specialists would overload the enemy's communication networks with legitimate traffic. "The key to success is timing," Sarah continued. "Every aircraft must reach its assigned position within a 30-second window. If we achieve this synchronization, the enemy's network will reach a saturation point and begin making errors that create opportunities for successful attacks. Captain Turner raised his hand. Sarah, the coordination requirements for this mission are unprecedented. How do we ensure that 12 aircraft operating independently can achieve such precise timing? Sarah smiled, recognizing the question she had been hoping someone would ask. Mike, we've been preparing for this mission without knowing it. Every backup pilot in this room has been studying the same tactical scenarios, analyzing the same enemy capabilities, and developing complementary approaches to the same problems. We understand each other's methods better than any group of pilots in Air Force history. The observation was accurate and profound. The backup pilots had been relegated to secondary status, but that relegation had created an unexpected advantage. While primary pilots focused on executing proven tactics, backup pilots had been developing innovative approaches and studying theoretical scenarios that prepared them for unprecedented challenges. Furthermore, Sarah continued, our lack of combat experience is actually an advantage in this situation. The enemy's defenses are specifically designed to counter experienced pilots using traditional tactics. They haven't anticipated the innovative approaches we've developed through theoretical analysis. Captain Chun nodded in understanding. We've been invisible to our own commanders, which means we've been invisible to enemy intelligence as well. They don't know our capabilities or tactical innovations. The discussion continued as Sarah outlined the specific role each pilot would play in the mission. Captain Turner would lead the electronic warfare component, creating false signatures that would confuse enemy sensors. Captain Chun would execute low-level penetration tactics that would avoid the enemy's primary detection systems. Captain Davis would coordinate precision targeting to ensure that all critical nodes were destroyed simultaneously. The mission timeline is unforgiving, Sarah explained. We launch in 8 hours, reach the target area in 12 hours, and have a 30-minute window to execute all attacks before the enemy can adapt their defenses. There's no margin for error. The briefing revealed the complete transformation of the backup pilot's role. They were no longer secondary personnel maintaining readiness for missions that might never come. They were the primary force executing the most important operation in decades, using tactics that had been developed through months of theoretical preparation. Questions? Sarah asked as she concluded the tactical overview. Captain Jennifer Walsh from Minute Air Force Base raised her hand. Sarah, what happens if the mission fails? What are the consequences for American forces in the Pacific? Sarah's expression became grave. Jenny, if this mission fails, we lose our strategic capabilities in the Pacific permanently. The enemy will have demonstrated that they can neutralize American air power using defensive networks that we cannot penetrate. The balance of power shifts permanently in their favor. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but Sarah also felt a sense of purpose that had been missing throughout her career. For 18 months, she had been preparing for challenges that seemed hypothetical. Now those challenges were real, and her preparation was about to be tested in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. I need each of you to understand that this mission represents more than just a tactical operation, Sarah continued. We are proving that innovative thinking and analytical preparation can succeed where conventional approaches have failed. If we succeed, we validate an entirely new approach to military operations. The assembled pilots understood the implications. They were not just executing a mission, they were demonstrating that the military's traditional reliance on experience and proven methods might need to be supplemented by innovative thinking and theoretical preparation. The enemy expects us to behave like conventional pilots using traditional tactics, Sarah explained. They have studied our doctrine, analyzed our training, and developed countermeasures based on their understanding of how American pilots operate. But we are not conventional pilots. We are backup pilots who have been invisible for so long that no one, including the enemy, has noticed our potential. The revelation was complete. The backup pilots who had been overlooked and undervalued were about to become the primary force for the most important military operation in decades. Their months of theoretical preparation and innovative thinking had prepared them for challenges that experienced pilots using conventional tactics could not address. Final equipment checks begin in 2 hours, Sarah announced. I want every pilot to review their specific mission parameters and ensure they understand the coordination requirements. We launch in 8 hours, and the fate of American forces in the Pacific depends on our success. As the briefing concluded, Sarah felt the full weight of transformation. She was no longer Captain Sarah Mitchell, backup pilot for the 509th Bomb Wing. She was now Colonel Sarah Mitchell, mission commander for Operation Controlled Chaos, the most complex air operation in military history. The other pilots gathered around Sarah as they prepared to leave the briefing room. These were her colleagues, fellow backup pilots, who had shared the frustration of being perpetually ready, but never chosen. Now they were the chosen ones, selected not despite their backup status, but because of it. Sarah, Captain Turner said, I want you to know that every pilot in this room has complete confidence in your leadership and tactical analysis. We've been preparing for this mission our entire careers, even though we didn't know it at the time. The endorsement was echoed by the other pilots, creating a moment of solidarity that transcended individual concerns about the mission's risks. They were no longer competing for primary assignments or recognition. They were a team united by shared purpose and mutual respect for each other's capabilities. Sarah walked back to Spirit of Nebraska, where ground crews were making final preparations for the mission. The aircraft sat in its hardened shelter, ready for immediate launch. Every system had been checked, every component verified, every procedure reviewed. The bomber was as ready as human skill and technological sophistication could make it. As Sarah stood in the aircraft's shadow, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 18 months ago, she had been assigned to backup status, relegated to the margins of military aviation. She had responded to that assignment by developing capabilities that went far beyond normal requirements, studying enemy systems with obsessive attention to detail, and creating innovative tactics that challenged conventional military doctrine. Now her analytical preparation and innovative thinking were about to be tested in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. The mission would either validate her approach or demonstrate that combat experience was irreplaceable. Either way, she would no longer be invisible. The transformation was complete. The backup pilot who had been overlooked for 18 months was about to become the primary pilot executing the most important mission of her career. Her theoretical preparation was about to become operational reality, and her innovative tactics were about to be tested in the crucible of combat. In 6 hours, Sarah would climb into Spirit of Nebraska and launch into the most dangerous airspace in the world, leading 11 other backup pilots in an operation that would determine the fate of American strategic capabilities. The revelation had occurred not through dramatic announcement or sudden recognition, but through the gradual accumulation of crises that demanded exactly the capabilities she had been developing in obscurity. The invisible backup pilot was about to become the most visible pilot in the Air Force, and her success or failure would determine whether innovative thinking could triumph over conventional approaches in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The launch sequence began at 2,200 hours under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for the most ambitious stealth operation in military history. Sarah's hands moved through the pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision while her mind processed the cascade of information flowing through her headset. 12 B-2 bombers were simultaneously preparing for departure from bases across the continental United States, each carrying specialized ordnance designed for specific targets within the enemy's defensive network. Spirit of Nebraska, this is Tower Control. You are cleared for taxi to runway 27. Wind calm, altimeter 3002, visibility unlimited. Sarah advanced the throttle slightly, feeling the massive aircraft respond to her commands as it rolled out of the hardened shelter. The B-2's stealth characteristics made it nearly invisible to radar, but Sarah could see the navigation lights of other aircraft as they moved toward their assigned runways. The sight was both reassuring and sobering. She was leading the largest coordinated bomber operation since World War II. All Phantom elements, this is Phantom Leader. Sarah transmitted on the encrypted frequency that connected her to the 11 other backup pilots. Radio check, report status. The responses came quickly, each pilot confirming their readiness for the mission that would test every aspect of their theoretical preparation. Captain Turner in Phantom 2 reported electronic warfare systems fully operational. Captain Chun in Phantom 3 confirmed low-level penetration equipment ready. Captain Davis in Phantom 4 verified precision targeting systems online. Phantom Leader, this is Control. You are cleared for takeoff. Weather at the target area is clear with moderate winds. Intelligence reports enemy defensive systems at maximum readiness. Sarah aligned Spirit of Nebraska with the runway centerline and slowly advanced the throttles to takeoff power. The 4 engines produced thrust with almost supernatural quietness, accelerating the aircraft to rotation speed with minimal noise signature. As the bomber lifted off into the darkness, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of leaving the Earth behind, but tonight carried the additional weight of knowing that the mission's success would determine the fate of American forces across the Pacific. The first phase of the operation required precise navigation to multiple rendezvous points where the 12 bombers would coordinate their approach to the target area. Sarah's route took her northwest toward Alaska, where she would join with 3 other aircraft before turning southwest toward the enemy's defensive perimeter. The timing was critical. Every element of the mission had to arrive at the target area within a 30-second window to create the controlled chaos that would overwhelm the enemy's processing capabilities. Phantom Leader, this is Overlord Control, came the voice of General Williams from the command center. Satellite intelligence shows enemy defensive systems are fully active. Multiple surface-to-air missile batteries are tracking unknown contacts, and their early warning radars are sweeping at maximum power. Sarah acknowledged the transmission while processing the tactical implications. The enemy's heightened alert status meant they were expecting some kind of American response, but their defensive posture suggested they were prepared for conventional attacks rather than the innovative approach she had developed. Overlord Control, Phantom Leader. Are there any indications that the enemy is aware of our specific approach or timing? Negative, Phantom Leader. Intelligence suggests they're maintaining standard defensive protocols. They appear to be prepared for traditional penetration tactics. The assessment confirmed Sarah's analysis. The enemy's sophisticated defensive network was designed to counter experienced pilots using proven methods, but they hadn't anticipated the coordinated complexity of operation. Controlled chaos. Her months of studying their automated response systems had revealed patterns that could be exploited through precisely timed coordination. 3 hours into the flight, Sarah reached the first rendezvous point, where she joined with Phantom 6, Phantom 9, and Phantom 12 for the approach to the target area. The 4 aircraft flew in loose formation, maintaining communication while preserving the key individual stealth characteristics that made them nearly invisible to enemy detection systems. Phantom Leader, this is Phantom 6, transmitted Captain Susan Rodriguez. I'm receiving intermittent radar contacts that suggest the enemy is probing for our presence. Their search patterns are more aggressive than intelligence predicted. Sarah checked her own radar warning receivers, noting the increased activity from enemy surveillance systems. The enemy was clearly aware that something was happening, but their search patterns indicated they were looking for conventional aircraft approaching through traditional routes. All Phantom elements, this is Phantom Leader. Enemy surveillance activity is increasing, but they're focusing on conventional approach corridors. Maintain current heading and altitude. We're still invisible to their primary detection systems. The next 2 hours tested every aspect of Sarah's navigation and tactical planning. The enemy's defensive network included overlapping radar coverage, mobile surface-to-air missile systems, and coordinated fighter patrols that created a three-dimensional maze of threats. Sarah's route planning had identified corridors between these defenses, but the enemy's increased activity was closing some of the gaps she had intended to exploit. Phantom Leader, this is Phantom 3, transmitted Captain Chun. I'm detecting mobile radar units that weren't in the original intelligence. They're repositioning to cover some of our planned penetration routes. Sarah's analytical training kicked in as she processed this new information. The enemy's ability to adapt their defensive positions indicated sophisticated command and control capabilities, but it also created opportunities for the controlled chaos approach she had developed. Phantom 3, Roger. Enemy adaptability confirms. Our tactical assessment. Their network is designed to respond to changing conditions, which means we can overload their processing capabilities through coordinated activity. The final approach to the target area began exactly on schedule, with all 12 aircraft converging on the enemy's defensive perimeter from different directions. Sarah's tactical display showed the positions of her fellow pilots as they executed the most complex coordinated penetration in military history. All Phantom elements, this is Phantom Leader. We are beginning the final approach. Execute Phase 1 of the Controlled Chaos Protocol. The first phase involved the electronic warfare. Aircraft creating false signatures throughout the enemy's surveillance network. Captain Turner's specialized equipment began transmitting signals that mimicked the electromagnetic characteristics of multiple aircraft, creating dozens of false targets that appeared on enemy radar screens. Phantom Leader, this is Phantom 2. False signature generation is active. Enemy radars are tracking over 40 contacts across the entire defensive perimeter. Sarah watched her tactical display as the enemy's defensive systems responded to the false threats. Surface-to-air missile batteries began tracking the Phantom targets. Fighter aircraft changed course to intercept non-existent intruders, and command centers started coordinating responses to attacks that weren't actually occurring. Phase 2. Execute, Sarah commanded, initiating the next element of her tactical plan. The cyber warfare specialists who had been integrated into the mission began flooding the enemy's communication networks with legitimate traffic designed to overload their processing capabilities. Intelligence reports, weather updates, maintenance requests, and administrative messages saturated the enemy's systems with information that required analysis and response. Phantom Leader, this is Cyber Control. Enemy communication networks are approaching saturation point. Response times are increasing, and we're detecting processing delays throughout their command structure. Sarah smiled grimly as her tactical analysis proved accurate. The enemy's sophisticated network was becoming overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information it was required to process. Their technological advantage was becoming a liability as their systems struggled to distinguish between real threats and false signatures. All Phantom elements execute Phase 3. Begin coordinated penetration. The 12 B-2 bombers began their simultaneous approach to the target area, each aircraft following precisely calculated routes that would bring them to their assigned targets within the critical 30-second window. Sarah's route took her directly toward the enemy's primary command and control facility, the most heavily defended target in the entire network. Phantom Leader, I'm detecting multiple SAM launches, transmitted Captain Davis. Enemy defensive systems are engaging targets throughout the perimeter. Sarah's radar warning receivers lit up with threat indicators as surface-to-air missiles began launching across the entire defensive network. The enemy's automated systems were responding to the false signatures and coordinated penetration attempts, but their responses were creating exactly the chaos Sarah had calculated. All Phantom elements, enemy defensive systems are operating at maximum capacity. Continue approach to assigned targets. The controlled chaos protocol is working. The enemy's surface-to-air missiles were engaging false targets created by the electronic warfare aircraft, while their fighter aircraft were intercepting Phantom threats that existed only in their computer systems. The real B-2 bombers were approaching their targets through corridors that had been temporarily cleared by the enemy's misdirected defensive efforts. Phantom Leader, this is Phantom 7. I have visual contact with Target Alpha. Beginning attack. Run. Sarah's tactical display showed all 12 aircraft approaching their assigned targets simultaneously. The enemy's defensive network was responding to dozens of false threats, while the real threats approached undetected through the chaos their sophisticated systems had created. Target acquisition complete, Sarah announced as the enemy's command. Facility appeared on her targeting display. Phantom Leader is beginning attack run. The precision-guided munitions she carried were designed specifically for this target, with penetration capabilities that could destroy hardened command bunkers and the electronic warfare, characteristics that made them nearly impossible to intercept. Sarah's targeting system locked onto the facility's critical components, calculating the precise release point for maximum effectiveness. Phantom Leader, weapons away, Sarah transmitted as she released her ordnance toward the target. Across the entire defensive network, 11 other aircraft were simultaneously attacking their assigned targets. The enemy's sophisticated command structure was being systematically dismantled by precision strikes that occurred too quickly for their defensive systems to coordinate effective responses. All Phantom elements, this is Phantom Leader. Report. Target engagement status. The responses came rapidly, each pilot confirming successful attacks against their assigned targets. The enemy's early warning radar network was being destroyed by Phantom 3 and Phantom 5. Their surface-to-air missile coordination centers were being eliminated by Phantom 7 and Phantom 9. Their command and control facilities were being neutralized by Phantom Leader and Phantom 6. Target Alpha destroyed, Sarah confirmed as her munitions detonated against the enemy's primary command facility. Phantom Leader is egressing the target area. The withdrawal phase of the mission proved as challenging as the penetration, with the enemy's defensive systems attempting to respond to the coordinated attacks. However, the controlled chaos approach had created so much confusion that their response was disorganized and ineffective. Phantom Leader, this is Overlord Control. Intelligence confirms successful destruction of all assigned targets. The enemy's defensive network is showing signs of complete collapse. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction as her tactical analysis was validated by operational success. The enemy's sophisticated defensive network had been neutralized not through overwhelming force or technological superiority, but through innovative thinking that turned their own capabilities against them. All Phantom elements, this is Phantom Leader. Mission accomplished. RTB to assigned recovery bases. The flight back to Whiteman Air Force Base gave Sarah time to process the magnitude of what had been accomplished. The backup pilots who had been overlooked and undervalued had successfully executed the most complex air operation in military history, using tactics that challenged conventional military doctrine and proved that innovative thinking could triumph over experience when facing unprecedented challenges. Phantom Leader, this is Overlord Control. Be advised that enemy forces are withdrawing from the siege perimeter. American forces at Guam are reporting that hostile aircraft and naval units are retreating from the area. The strategic implications were staggering. The destruction of the enemy's defensive network had not only broken the siege, but had demonstrated that their most sophisticated military capabilities could be neutralized through coordinated application of innovative tactics. The balance of power in the Pacific had been restored through the actions of 12 pilots who had been invisible until the crisis demanded their unique capabilities. As Sarah approached Whiteman Air Force Base, she could see the lights of the runway that had been her home for 18 months. But she was returning as a different person than the one who had departed. The backup pilot who had been relegated to secondary status had become the mission commander, who had saved American strategic capabilities in the Pacific. The controlled chaos approach had succeeded, beyond even Sarah's most optimistic projections, proving that theoretical preparation and innovative thinking could overcome technological advantages when properly applied. The enemy's defensive network lay in ruins, their siege had been broken, and their confidence in their military capabilities had been shattered. Spirit of Nebraska, this is Tower Control. You are cleared for landing runway 27. Welcome home. Sarah smiled as she configured the aircraft for landing, knowing that she was no longer the invisible backup pilot who had been overlooked for so long. She was now the architect of victory, the leader who had proved that innovation could triumph over convention when the stakes were highest and the challenges were greatest. The debriefing room at Whiteman Air Force Base had been transformed into something resembling a war room, with senior officials from the Pentagon, representatives from allied nations, and intelligence analysts who had monitored every aspect of Operation Controlled Chaos. Sarah entered to find herself facing an audience that included the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and commanders from military services across the globe. "Colonel Mitchell," announced General Williams, using Sarah's new rank for the first time in public, "please take your seat at the head of the table." The promotion had been processed during the flight back from the mission, recognizing not just her tactical success, but her fundamental contribution to military aviation doctrine. Sarah moved to the indicated chair, noting how the room's dynamics had shifted completely from 18 months earlier, when she had been invisible to most of the people now hanging on her every word. "Ladies and gentlemen," began Secretary of Defense Margaret Harrison, Operation Controlled Chaos represents the most significant tactical innovation in modern military history. The successful destruction of the enemy's defensive network has not only broken the siege of Guam, but has fundamentally altered the strategic balance in the Pacific theater. Sarah looked around the room, seeing faces that reflected a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and professional respect. These were the same senior officials who had previously overlooked her analytical contributions, now eager to understand how a backup pilot had developed tactics that conventional military doctrine had failed to produce. "Colonel Mitchell," continued, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Robert Stone, "your after-action report indicates that the controlled chaos approach exceeded all projected success parameters. The enemy's defensive network collapsed in under 30 minutes, and their withdrawal from the siege perimeter was complete within 6 hours. How do you explain such a comprehensive victory?" Sarah had been preparing for this question throughout the flight home, knowing that her tactical innovations would be scrutinized by the highest levels of military leadership. "Sir, the enemy's defensive network was designed to counter conventional American tactics based on overwhelming technological superiority. They invested heavily in systems that could neutralize our traditional approaches, but they didn't anticipate strategies that used their own sophistication against them." "Elaborate," requested General Stone. Sarah activated the room's display system, showing tactical diagrams that had been refined through months of theoretical analysis. The enemy's network was designed to process and respond to threats in a hierarchical manner. Their automated systems were programmed to identify targets, assess threat levels, and coordinate responses through centralized command structures. This approach is highly effective against conventional attacks, but becomes vulnerable when overwhelmed with simultaneous information from multiple sources. The assembled officials studied the diagrams as Sarah explained the principles behind her tactical innovations. The controlled chaos approach exploited this vulnerability by creating more simultaneous activity than their systems could effectively Process. Instead of trying to penetrate their defenses through stealth or overwhelming force, we caused their own systems to create the penetration corridors we needed. Admiral Patricia Foster, the Navy's representative, leaned forward with obvious interest. Colonel, this approach seems to contradict fundamental principles of military strategy. Conventional doctrine emphasizes concentration of force and decisive action at critical points. You're describing something that appears to be the opposite. Sarah nodded, having anticipated this observation. Admiral, you're correct that this approach contradicts conventional wisdom, but conventional wisdom was developed to address conventional threats. The enemy's defensive network represented an unconventional challenge that required unconventional solutions. The key insight, Sarah continued, was recognizing that their technological sophistication created dependencies that could be exploited. Their automated systems were programmed to respond to specific scenarios, but they couldn't adapt quickly enough to scenarios that hadn't been anticipated. General Williams spoke up from her position at the side of the room. Colonel Mitchell, your tactical innovations have been studied by our allies and potential adversaries. Initial assessments suggest that this approach could be applied to other military challenges beyond air defense penetration. What's your assessment of the broader applications? Sarah had been considering this question since the mission's successful completion. General, the controlled chaos approach is fundamentally about understanding how sophisticated systems process information and then overwhelming those processing capabilities through coordinated complexity. The principles could be applied to any situation where advanced technology is being used to create military advantages. The discussion continued for another hour as senior officials explored the implications of Sarah's tactical innovations. The breakthrough wasn't just about defeating a specific enemy defensive network. It was about developing new approaches to modern warfare that could counter technological advantages through creative thinking rather than superior equipment. Colonel Mitchell, said Secretary Harrison, the President has asked me to convey his personal congratulations on your exceptional service. Operation Controlled Chaos will be studied by military academies for decades to come, and your innovations are already being incorporated into tactical doctrine across all services. Sarah felt the weight of recognition that had been absent throughout her career. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to emphasize that this mission's success was achieved through the contributions of 11 other backup pilots who demonstrated exceptional skill and dedication. Their willingness to execute untested tactics under extreme conditions was essential to our success. The comment drew nods of approval from the assembled officials, who recognized that Sarah's leadership had extended beyond tactical innovation to effective team coordination. The backup pilots had performed flawlessly under conditions that would have challenged the most experienced crews. Speaking of the backup pilots, interjected General Stone, we need to address the implications of this mission for personnel assignments and training protocols. Your success suggests that we may need to reconsider how we evaluate pilot capabilities and assign operational roles. Sarah had been hoping someone would raise this issue. Sir, the backup pilot's success demonstrates that analytical preparation and innovative thinking can be as valuable as combat experience when facing unprecedented challenges. The military might benefit from creating positions that allow officers to focus on theoretical analysis and tactical development rather than treating such activities as secondary to operational flying. The suggestion represented a fundamental challenge to military culture, which traditionally valued practical experience over theoretical knowledge. However, Operation Controlled Chaos had demonstrated that theoretical preparation could produce tactical advantages that practical experience had failed to identify. Colonel, said Admiral Foster, are you suggesting that the military should create a separate track for analytical specialists? I'm suggesting that the military should recognize analytical capabilities as a distinct skill set that complements operational experience, Sarah replied. The backup pilots weren't successful because they lacked combat experience. They were successful because they had time to study problems that operational pilots were too busy to analyze thoroughly. The room fell silent as the officials processed this concept. Sarah was proposing that the military's traditional emphasis on operational experience might need to be balanced with greater recognition of analytical capabilities. There's another factor to consider, Sarah continued. The enemy's intelligence operations focused on our primary pilots and established tactical procedures. They didn't anticipate the capabilities of personnel who had been relegated to backup status. Our invisibility became a strategic advantage. Colonel Harrison, who had observed Sarah's transformation from backup pilot to mission commander, spoke up. Colonel Mitchell raises an important point about the value of unconventional approaches. The enemy spent years studying our conventional tactics and developing countermeasures, but they couldn't counter tactics that didn't exist until we developed them. The debriefing continued for another 2 hours as senior officials explored every aspect of Operation Controlled Chaos. Sarah found herself answering questions about tactical details, strategic implications, and the potential applications of her innovations to other military challenges. Colonel Mitchell, concluded Secretary Harrison, you and your team have achieved something unprecedented in modern military history. You've proven that innovative thinking can overcome technological advantages when properly applied. The Department of Defense will be implementing your tactical concepts across all services. As the formal debriefing concluded, Sarah was approached by several officials who wanted to discuss specific aspects of her tactical innovations. The conversations revealed the far-reaching implications of her success. Military academies would be revising their curricula. Tactical doctrine would be updated to incorporate her concepts, and personnel policies would be modified to better utilize analytical capabilities. Colonel, said General Williams as the room began to empty, I want to discuss your next assignment. Given your demonstrated capabilities, there are several positions available that would allow you to continue developing tactical innovations. Sarah had been expecting this conversation. General, I appreciate the opportunities, but I'd like to remain at Whiteman Air Force Base. I believe there's still work to be done here, and I want to continue working with the B-2 program. Williams looked surprised. Colonel, you could have any assignment in the Air Force. Why would you want to remain at Whiteman? Sarah smiled as she considered how to explain her decision. General, 18 months ago I was assigned to backup status because I lacked the combat experience considered essential for primary pilot positions. That assignment gave me the time and freedom to develop capabilities that proved decisive in our most important mission. I think there's value in maintaining that analytical focus. You want to remain involved with the backup pilot program? I want to expand it, Sarah replied. The success of Operation Controlled Chaos demonstrates that there's tremendous value in having personnel who can focus on theoretical analysis and tactical development. I'd like to create a formal program that cultivates these capabilities. Williams nodded slowly. You're proposing to institutionalize the analytical approach that made you successful. Exactly. The military needs people who can think beyond conventional approaches and develop solutions to challenges that haven't been encountered before. The backup pilot program accidentally created those conditions, but we could create them deliberately. The conversation continued as Sarah outlined her vision for a new type of military assignment that would combine operational readiness with analytical development. The concept would allow officers to maintain flight qualifications while focusing on tactical innovation and strategic analysis. Colonel Mitchell, Williams concluded, I'll support your proposal. The success of Operation Controlled Chaos has earned you the right to shape how the military approaches tactical development. As Sarah left the debriefing room, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 18 months earlier, she had been the invisible backup pilot, overlooked by commanders who valued experience over analytical capability. Now she was the architect of victory, recognized for innovations that had saved American strategic capabilities in the Pacific. The transformation was complete, but Sarah understood that recognition brought new responsibilities. Her tactical innovations would be studied and implemented across the military, and her analytical approach would influence how future officers approached strategic challenges. Walking across the flight line towards Spirit of Nebraska, Sarah saw the aircraft that had been her laboratory for 18 months of theoretical preparation. The B-2 sat in its hardened shelter, ready for the next mission that might require innovative thinking and unprecedented tactical approaches. "Colonel Mitchell," called Master Sergeant Parker as she approached the aircraft, "congratulations on your promotion and the mission success. It's been an honor working with you." Sarah smiled at the crew chief who had supported her throughout the months of preparation. "Thank you, Sergeant Parker. We couldn't have succeeded without your dedication to maintain this aircraft at peak readiness. What's next for you, Colonel?" Sarah looked at the aircraft that had carried her through the most important mission of her career. "I'm going to continue doing what I've been doing, Sergeant. I'm going to prepare for challenges that haven't been encountered yet, develop tactics that haven't been tried before, and make sure the military has people who can think beyond conventional approaches." The backup pilot, who had been invisible for 18 months, was now visible throughout the military establishment, but she understood that her greatest contribution hadn't been her visibility, it had been her ability to see possibilities that others had missed. As Sarah walked toward her office, she began planning the next phase of her career. The controlled chaos approach had proven that innovative thinking could overcome technological advantages, but there were other challenges that required analytical solutions. The military needed people who could develop tactics for scenarios that hadn't been encountered, strategies for threats that hadn't been identified, and approaches to problems that hadn't been recognized. The backup pilot program had accidentally created the conditions for tactical innovation, but Sarah intended to create those conditions deliberately. The military's future success might depend on having personnel who could think beyond conventional wisdom and develop solutions to unprecedented challenges. Sarah Mitchell had proven that being the backup pilot wasn't about being secondary, it was about being ready for the mission that no one else could complete. Her recognition had come not from seeking visibility, but from developing capabilities that became essential when conventional approaches failed. The new recognition brought new opportunities, but Sarah understood that her greatest value lay in continuing to prepare for challenges that couldn't be anticipated. The invisible backup pilot had become the visible architect of victory, but her mission remained the same: to be ready for whatever threats might emerge and to develop the innovative solutions that would overcome them. In the end, Sarah Mitchell had discovered that being the backup pilot wasn't about being overlooked, it was about being prepared for the moment when everyone else would be looking to her for answers. That moment had come, and she had been ready. Now she would make sure that the military would always have people who were ready for the next moment that no one could predict. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.